our calendar this week, Holocaust Memorial Day, or Yom HaShoah in Hebrew. The observance began in Israel and is spread to Jewish communities all over the world. In Israel, sirens sounded for 2 minutes, and the country literally stood still. In this country, many synagogues observed the day with special services, reading the names of Holocaust victims and lighting candles for the dead. Our perspectives this week are on the shattering crisis of faith the Holocaust caused and still causes for many of us, especially for many Jews. How could God have permitted such an atrocity to people who believed they had a unique covenant with Him? We talked about the changes the Holocaust forced in their concept of God with theologians Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg of New York and Michael Berenbaum of Los Angeles. Also with Flora Singer of Potomac, Maryland, a Holocaust survivor.
Where are you, God? Basically, that was the question. Where are you? If you exist, where are you? Why are you allowing this?
Traditional Jewish theology has always maintained that there is a relationship between one's behavior and one's fate in the world. The problem when you apply the traditional lessons of prophetic Judaism and of Jewish theology to the Holocaust is you have to speak about what are the sins that would lead to the Holocaust. The moment you enter that world, you enter to the world of obscenity.
I don't believe that any sin could justify the kind of pain and suffering that was inflicted upon Jews. At some point, when I would constantly torment myself, where was God and where was God? The answer was obvious, where was God? Where else would God be but suffering with God's people? And so God was in the concentration camps. God was in the gas chamber being gassed. God was being burnt alive at Auschwitz. So that asked the wrong question. The question was not where was God. That was, to me, evident. The real question is why hadn't God stopped it? And there it seemed to me the answer was that, as a believer at least, I came to believe that God was asking me to stop it, that in some sense the divine message was that the human partner was supposed to have stopped this.
I think that any view of history has to maintain that God has allowed humanity the freedom to shape history. What that means in terms of what God is, I'm not sure. What it means in terms of what our responsibility is, I am sure, which is that we are the actors in history.
What we have to come to grips with, we always thought that this partnership was guaranteed, that God was going to step in and save us from our worst sins, our worst errors, that there was a guaranteed happy ending, and God was our ace in the hole, so to speak, against our worst mistakes. I now have come to believe that God truly believes in freedom and has given us that freedom.
In a world of ugliness, we must create beauty. And a world in which God is absent, we must affirm God's presence. And a world in which human beings don't behave like human beings, we have to behave like human beings. Yitz Greenberg made one of the most important theological points made in the whole history of post-Holocaust literature.
I once wrote after the Holocaust that no theological statements should be made that would not be credible in the presence of burning children. What could you say about God when a child is burning alive? My answer is there's nothing to say. If there's anything you can do, jump into that pit and pull the child out. And if you can heal that child, if you can pour oil on their burns, then you are making a statement about God.
So if you ask me if I believe in God, the answer is I wrestle with God. I confront God, I fight God, I shout at God, I scream at God. I live in tension with God. But do I have the naive belief in God? No, I can't have a naive belief in God. And God can't be naively good either. If we had a naive conception of God, then God was awful, because a God who intervenes in history would have been present.
The fairy tale, the God of the white beard in heaven and all's well with the world, the one who does it all for us, I think no longer credible, no longer possible. But a mature understanding of a God who loves us and our freedom, who has called us to responsibility, who is with us at every moment. I think such a God is, if anything, more present and more close. Maybe having suffered together and having shared our pain infinitely, if anything, is more beloved and maybe more inspiring to follow.
The great Canadian Jewish theologian Emil Fackenheim once said the Holocaust was a rupture. And let's picture the rupture like this, with the idea that the Holocaust was a rupture. Everything we believe in, our belief in God, our belief in humanity, our belief in the traditions of humanism, all came apart. But it wasn't a complete rupture. And therefore, what's required in the aftermath of rupture is mending. And Nachman of Bratslav said that nothing is as whole as a heart that has been broken and mended. And where we mend in a garment, in a ripped garment, where we mend, that's the strongest part of the garment.
There has to be someone up there outside, or in the world. There has to be a higher being who oversees, and for whatever reason is balancing and is preserving us. I don't know.
Usually I don't finish talking. There's something that once I get started, I go on and on and on. So in order to protect you from my verbosity, I have written down some notes which I will read, and that will restrict me to be remain within the limit. But what I would like to do is I'd like to take a moment and ask those of us who were protected and saved by Father Brunner to stand up for a moment so that you can see the living people and the proof of his beauty and well-being. Father Brunner, as he said in 1964, when he was honored at Yad Vashem, and a tree was planted in his honor, and I'll hold up a photograph of the time. He said, "Why are you honoring me? Why did you choose me?" And he was told why he was chosen to be honored at Yad Vashem and have a tree planted in his honor. He said, "Isn't that what human beings are supposed to do?" He said, "And all I did is knock on doors, and they opened for me." That is how he minimized. No great heroic. There were other people who hit us. It's true. He could not have done it totally alone. But there were people, and he knocked on doors, and the doors did open. In fact, there's another young woman who managed to survive the Holocaust because she was also hidden by what we call the righteous or the just of the nations. And so now I'll go to my notes, otherwise I won't stop today, and you'll be wondering. Okay. Helen Keller, who is blind, deaf, and mute, left behind a message on the meaning of life. And she said, "Life is either a daring adventure or it is nothing." My own life was certainly an adventure, not only before and during the war, but also after the war. But I won't go into that. It still is, in spite of everything. I get up each morning to face the day, the light of day, be it sunshine or rain, determined to enjoy the day and make it meaningful. That is what I think Helen Keller meant, that we take each day and make that day meaningful, that we live it. I was born the first daughter of three to a young, gentle couple who had immigrated to Belgium from Romania to escape the anti-Semitism in their native land. And for a while, they lived a productive, happy life. And then everything changed. During World War II, during the period we call the Holocaust, I, along with millions of others, was condemned to be annihilated. Why? Elie Wiesel spoke about that today, and I don't have to repeat it. You all, at this point, know why. But my question was, at the time I remember him saying, well, what did I do? I tried to be obedient. Sometimes I told a little lie, or, and, but I had arguments with my sisters, one of whom is sitting right here, and we're still very close and very good friends. And he said, what was wrong with me? What was wrong with me? My crime was having been born Jewish. That was my crime. And I had to, together with my mother and sisters, run and hide. Those who condemned me were not, as we imagine, monsters, when we think of monsters we see in shows and things. They were citizens of modern Central and Western Europe, well educated from an advanced country where music, art, advances in science, medicine flourish. I won't talk to you about the history of the period, 1933-1935. You can read about this in a vast body of Holocaust publication, and Elie Wiesel has certainly given us a vast body of work. What I want to do is just talk to you about why one individual who still today is compelled to remember and speak of the events which happened so long ago and which he survived. There are faces of those who didn't make it, who didn't return when we waited after the war. They still haunt me. But there is another side. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I would have been one of the 1.5 million children, as Elie Wiesel noted in his talk, who did not survive. I survived because of special individuals who refused to be intimidated, who fought fear of arrest, to whom every human life was sacred, and who we call today the just or the righteous of the nations. Those of us who are here today are here because of one of those special individuals, Father Bruno Reinders, or as he was known during the war, Don Bruno, who would have felt at home in this building with all his fellow monks, and he found hiding places for children. How he did it, we don't know. He did have collaborators. There were people who helped him. But ultimately, Father Bruno, as was said before, did disobey some important commandments. He was a thief, he was a liar, and he was a forger. And I have an example of 2 of his forgeries. In order to eat, we needed food ration cards and food ration stamps. We could not buy food without having the stamps. Now, Jews, after a certain period of time, no longer received ration cards or stamps. So how were we to get food? I won't even go into that history. So Father Bruno became a thief. He stole blank ration cards and identity cards. He stole a municipal stamp. And he had a collaborator, Father André of Namur, which is a city in Belgium. And he then filled them in with the false names we all bore. Fake names as Christian children. And once a month, people in charge of institutions, boarding schools, things like that, had to go to a special office, present all the cards, and they would receive the food ration stamps for the month. And he did. He once was almost arrested. He was standing in line, and a woman behind him said, "I'm in a very big hurry. Could I please go before you?" And being the gentleman he was, he let her go. Once she got to the table where she was supposed to receive the stamps, and this has nothing to do with women talking a lot, she suddenly had all the time in the world and got involved in a long conversation with the clerk. By the time Father Bruno came to the table, he had noticed a man sitting next to the clerk who distributed the stamps, whom he had never seen. And the man, meanwhile, while the woman was having her conversation, had gotten up and left. And it turned out that that man, in civil clothing, was from the Gestapo, waiting for Father Bruno to come. There were many stories, many dangers that he faced, but he continued doing what he was doing. And he filled those cards in, of course, with the fake names of the children. That's why he was a forger. But He broke the commandments, and I'm saying this for those of you in clerical garb. He broke the commandments to save lives. So we have to decide which is more important. The saving of the lives, and can we minimize the breaking of the commandments? Or are they still as bad? I have 2 cards. These are copies that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum made for me. I have the originals, and I'm waiting for the family to give me permission to give them to the museum. There were 6 of them, because when the Gestapo became aware of what he was doing, they were pursuing him. He stole another 6 cards and covered. Each of them has his photographs. Each of them has a different name, a slightly different birthday, a different profession. On this one, he was a cleric. In this one, he's a designer. And the other 4, he was something different. And this is how he managed not to hide. He hid behind the card. He hid by taking off his, before it was permitted, his clerical garb and putting on civilian clothing. But to the end of the war, continued doing what he was doing. And that's why we honor him today. Albert Camus once said, Albert Camus is a French writer who wrote, and he wrote, right after the war, he wrote a symbolic book called The Plate. You can read it, it's translated into English now. And he said, dealing with the public's inaction at the time, indifference or inaction or passivity, whatever we want to call it, he said, I know that the great tragedies of history often fascinate man with approaching horror. Paralyzed, they cannot make up their mind to do anything but wait. So they wait, and they wait, and one day the garden devours them. But I should like to convince you, he said, that the spell can be broken, that you can move, that you can act. And Father Bruno acted. As Elie Wiesel said earlier, and I had written it down prior to coming here, let us also remember that evil acts are a human dilemma, just as goodness is. And we are all, given the right circumstances, the lack of will to fight it, be we capable of condoning or engaging in such acts. We have freedom. We have been given freedom to decide what we're going to do and how to use our will, whether for the good or for evil. So let us all remember that human beings need each other. We cannot live one without the other. Before I conclude, I want to read a few words from a letter I just received. Father Bruno had a nephew. The nephew helped Father Bruno when he was a youngster, 13, 14-year-old, by sometimes accompanying a Jewish child to a hiding place. He lives in Denver. He was invited to join us today, but unfortunately he's very ill and greatly regrets not being here. So he wrote me a letter, and he said, thank you for the nice invitation to the ceremony honoring Père Bruno. Père Bruno means Father Bruno, and you. As you know, I'm unfortunately unable to travel and to attend this nice event. I hope you won't mind if I appoint you the co-honoree, my personal representative, asking you to convey to all who were involved in this beautiful Ernst family, the Delbarton School, my sincere thanks on my part, my family, and our heartfelt wishes on the occasion of this tribute to our uncle and to our entire family. And it's signed Michel Kramer. He is the son of Father Bruno's brother. Thank you. If you have any questions, I just want to tell you one little story. There is a couple here who were hidden by Father Bruno. They did not know of each other because he hid children in many different places. And after the war, in New York, I believe, no, they met at an evening, and they started to speak to each other. And Rochelle, you can tell the story better than I can.
Well, very briefly, I noticed that Jack had an accent, and I said, where are you from? And he said, Belgium. Me too. And he was, at that time, he was working as a busboy, I guess, up in the Catskills, and I was up there in a bungalow colony with my parents. I was 16, he was 20. And he said, Belgium. I said, me too. And then somehow, within 5 minutes, we talked to one another, and we talked about the war. It was almost within the first 2 or 3 minutes. And then he said he had been hidden. And I said, you were? And I said, I was hidden. And then he said he was hidden by Père Bruno, and I said, me too. And that was in 1955. We got married in 1959, and we have 3 children and 5 grandchildren.
Be converted. Our job is to save this child's life. The child's soul does not belong to us. Now, he was a monk and good. Thank you so much for listening.
Tuesday, April 29th is Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah. It's a solemn tribute to the 6 million Jews put to death by the Nazis before and during World War II. Yom HaShoah also reminds us of the range of reactions to Nazi persecution. Some people looked away, some risked their own lives to help, and religious believers were in both camps. Today, Betty Rollin tells the story of a woman who survived the Holocaust as a child because of the heroism of Christians who protected her.
From the Nazi point of view, it was a particularly good idea to kill young Jewish children. First, they represented a Jewish future, which the Nazis wanted to eliminate. Second, young children were useless.
Children, unless they were teenagers, could not provide forced labor. Children, infants, pregnant women were immediately sent to the gas chambers. There were some children that survived in the camps. In Buchenwald, for instance, there were approximately 1,000 children that were kept there. Some were hidden by other prisoners. There were also some that survived because they were chosen for medical experiments.
In 1939, there were about 1.6 million Jewish children in the countries that Germany was to occupy. By the time the war ended in 1945, more than 1 million of those children had been killed. Many of the children who survived the Holocaust were transported out of the country. Others were hidden, often in convents, monasteries, and orphanages. 72-year-old Flora Singer, who lives in Potomac, Maryland, was 10 years old when Nazi tanks rolled into Antwerp, Belgium, where she lived with her mother, Fanny, and her sisters, Charlotte, 7, and Betty, 4. Their father had gone ahead to America, expecting the family to follow, but they couldn't. As conditions worsened for Jews, a friend of Flora's father, a German soldier, secretly brought them food. One night he came to the house very late.
He says, don't talk, Fanny, just listen. Take the kids, if you can, get out of Antwerp.
This began a 4-year period of running and hiding. Their first stop was Brussels, where they found a protector.
We were very fortunate. A Christian neighbor who lived next to the apartment we rented let us use their name. Mom sent us to school, but we couldn't stay too long because the brother of one of the kids was a Nazi, and it was dangerous. Mom met a man through the principal. He took me into his home. His children could no longer bring home friends because I was there. His brother took in my middle sister, and his secretary took in the third one. He had a cousin who was a Franciscan nun, and she agreed to take us into her convent. She didn't tell the superior we were Jewish kids. He took us on a flatbed truck, put each one of us under a empty wooden crate, and around the crate and over the crate, he put crates filled with fruits and vegetables. And we were told, of course, to be totally silent.
Before they were separated from their mother, she gave Flora a warning about protecting her younger sisters.
Flora, God help you if something happens to the kids. And that's what she left me with. After the war, I did question her on that. And I said, Mama, how could you have put such a burden on me? I was so young. I said, sometimes I didn't know if I was more afraid of you or the Gestapo. She said, Flora, did I have a choice? Psychology wasn't the name of the game. The name of the game was survival.
They had to leave the convent after 3 months. Next stop was a Catholic orphanage where their identity became known. Again, they had to leave. To their rescue came Father Bruno, a Benedictine monk, who had taken it upon himself to hide 300 Jewish children and 90 adults.
Father Bruno stole blank food ration cards, filled them in with fake names. So and every month he went to collect food ration stamps and then distribute them wherever he hit people.
Why do you think these people who were Christians helped you?
Because they were just good human beings and could not stand by and see evil.
Do you think it was their religion?
No.
Or something else?
I could not say that it was their religion because many people who had religion betrayed. Many people who had religion turned away and made believe they didn't see. No, it was not religion itself. It was something more. It was something in them. My question always is, were I called upon to do what they did? Of course, I'd love to say, naturally, of course I'll help. Of course I'll hide someone. Of course I'll take the risk. But when that moment comes, somebody knocks on my door and says, I need help, they're pursuing me. Will I have the courage to do it? Will I risk my family and all that? And I'd like to answer you, of course I will, but none of us know if we would have the courage to do so.
How did this entire experience affect you?
I had great joy in watching my children be children. Because I don't remember really being a child ever.
In some of the studies that were done after the war, there was an assumption made that these children would be psychologically disturbed forever, that their experiences were so horrendous that they would be forever shaken by these. But in reality, these children showed a great deal of resilience and overcame many of those issues and have lived to tell their stories and have wanted to tell their stories.
Flora tells her story to children and adults around the country, as do other survivors. One way, they hope, of making sure the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten. For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Betty Rollin.
Flora Singer has vowed to honor all those who saved her and her family and have them recognized in Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel, which honors non-Jewish rescuers.
From NBC News, this is Today, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
There will be a rare event in Washington, D.C. this weekend. More than 2,000 Holocaust survivors are gathering to help mark the 10th anniversary of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And now the museum is offering an extraordinary program to help make sure the painful lessons learned from the past will never be forgotten. Here's NBC's Bob Dodson.
Dem Führer Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Flora Singer fears that the past is not past, that history can be repeated. She was just 10 when Father Bruno Reinders, a Catholic priest, hid her from the Nazis in Belgium.
And he managed to hide 300 kids and 90 adults across the country.
Today, she is telling her story to recruits from the Capitol Police, some of the 13,000 law enforcement officers who have come to the Holocaust Museum to stare evil in the face and struggle to understand.
He's about to shoot this man in the head.
Recent studies reveal how street cops helped soldiers murder more than 6 million unarmed people in Nazi Germany.
Others are standing
that haunts Washington Police Chief Charles Ramsey.
Evil looks a lot like us.
At times, but good looks an awful lot like us, and it's our choice as to which way we go.
Hitler, you don't think of him as a humble person.
4 years ago, Ramsey asked the Holocaust Museum to start a workshop that would teach today's recruits how cops of old could go from caring professionals to murderers. What they learn is stunning.
Very few of those officers were members of the Nazi Party.
Museum historian William Meineke says that in the beginning, 20% of those cops refused direct orders to shoot unarmed citizens.
This is not our job. I want no part of this. Get me out of here. And the Nazi state transfers them out.
So those officers would not quit their jobs in protest. Instead, Hitler gave them their first pay raise in 10 years and more power to fight crime, even though most never joined the Nazi Party. Eventually, many did agree to help the Nazis round up innocent citizens.
Kids, wives, grandpas.
For police, this place is a lot like visiting a crime scene with evidence they can touch and identify. A crime scene so powerful that some officers who have gone before now come back to teach new recruits what all